Here's another one that involves Robert Zepper. You know, after two of these, I actually said he was on fire right now, and then the third and fourth have come out and really put a definite fireworks display on the situation. He must be commended. And again, I don't agree with everything that he says, and I'm just kind of appreciative that during these last 4 or 5 videos that he's put out, he hasn't tried to interject too much on the woo-woo situation and goes with more reality and facts and DNA and things like that to prove it. What we're looking at here is something of a verification video showing you that the ancient Brahmins and caste system that started off India came from the Aryan people, and that they've now come to grips with it, but yet not really, because they've turned around and tried to say, and we should make all these people leave somehow. We'll get into the spice of that here in just a minute. Let him get a few statements into it here.
The leader of India's National People's Party said that DNA testing has proven that Brahmins, the highest Hindu noble priest caste, were ancient Aryan settlers from Russia. Quote, the DNA test shows no Brahmins belong to this country and are from Russia and have now settled here. While this statement has received a lot of backlash on Twitter and social media, it matches the official position of the Indian government, as well as accredited anthropologists that have evaluated the DNA evidence, some of which I will go over now.
Again, this is just a verification type video where there's being a change in the wind, if you will. And it's showing you that, well, DNA doesn't lie. And so there's something to be accounted for here, and it's all been true. 4 or 5 years ago, I did a video showing you that they were trying to discount this situation, but in the process, they were showing you that it actually exists, which is crazy. In this strange idea, they want to get rid of their highest caste system, but their middle 2 caste systems are actually admixed variants between the 2 people of the ancient Tamil style people, which really closest analog is the primitives that still live on Senegalese Island, or Sentinel Island. And he'll get into that in a minute here, but in this first showing, we're looking at the DNA of people, and Ron Pinhasi and others that are actually involved in this are from India, along with the last name there of David Reich, which has become very well known as someone who is on the cutting edge of figuring out how this all happened.
A recent genetic study titled The Genomic Formation of South and Central Asia analyzed genome-wide data from over 500 ancient individuals, meaning DNA samples of people that lived thousands of years ago compared to people living in present-day groups in South Asia, settling major questions about India's history and what that means for various theories of how civilization arose in the subcontinent.
You can see the highlighted sentence here is they mixed with the descendants of steppe pastoralists who spread via Central Asia after 4,000 years ago, or somewhere around 2000 BC. I've shown in a couple of other statements or a couple of other showings that actually this wasn't the first time, and that's the reason they have this sacred cow situation. They were given this once, and due to an extreme drought and bad situation that happened to them, they ran out of their cattle basically and had to be replenished again. And that was done by Aryans too, of course, because they were the people that had domesticated cattle in the first place. They have a special form that's there that is a Brahman cow. If anybody's ever seen rodeos, they probably see a mix of Brahman and Angus type cattle where it has that knot on its neck, but he's bigger over it all. A huge male that you try to ride. Yeah, it's weird. It's things that go back to ancient Italy and really the old Minoans and how they used to bull jump and all kinds of things. Looking at this little picture that's inset here, they talk about the Yamnaya steppe pastoralist, and now their spread had gone across Europe here and showing it and the timelines that went along with it and how they had mixed with the people as they got into those people. They're there.
Authored by over 90 scientists from around the world, including scholars from Harvard, MIT, and the Max Planck Institute, the data documents a southward spread of genetic ancestry from the Eurasian steppe.
Here the highlighted sentences is earlier work had already recorded massive population movement from the Eurasian steppe into Europe early in the 3rd millennium BC. We know of this, of course, of all the different tales that we have for it, and the Normans and how this all played out. And we really don't have too much of a problem with it. But he'll show you later, too, that a lot of the people that we would all think of as being Western Europeans were actually in this same area and in the Middle East in the ancient of times. So they were likely spreading Indo-European languages. We reveal a parallel series of events leading to the spread of steppe ancestry to South Asia also, thereby documenting movements of people that were likely conduits for the spread of Indo-European languages. Indo-European used to be called Aryan. Since World War II, they've had to change that because of all the connotations that are along with it. But it's a word that was used to describe them and even by themselves somewhat, and we'll show you that coming up here shortly. Spanning the last 8,000 years, they talk about, they were looking through the genetics and how things changed, and they go, well, here's a big change that happened right here. So it's validation again.
Correlating with the archaeologically known expansion of pastoralist sites from the Bronze Age over 4,000 years ago, starting around 2300 BC. Eventually
mixing in the continent of India. I don't quite have it in picture here, it's just to the left, where they show a lighter shade at the top, a white, and then green to black down at the bottom of it, and then how these people mixed, and that you can see people of North India today with a guy on the far top right looking like Finding Nemo, and then the people of South India whose closest analog are these primitives that are in a pre-Neolithic state still on Sentinel Island. You can see variations on a theme between them, but they do generally have a Caucasian phenotype here that's not evident in the Andamanese Islanders.
With earlier agriculturalists of Iran, then integrating farther south with people whose closest modern-day relatives are the tribes of the Andaman Islands. The indigenous natives of the Andaman Islands are among the various groups considered negrito, a Spanish term coined in the 16th century by missionaries, used to mean little black person.
And strange that we have this picture to the right. I just did another video on Billy Carson and his claims that the Anunnaki came down, and of course the first ones they created were black people, and the people of the Bible were black, but Noah was an albino black person and all that stuff he tries to pull off. but different people from different star systems came here and they all intergressed with different Homo erectus species or primates before that, and that created us all. And instead of using Asiatics or Orientals, as I prefer to say on it because Asia is Caucasians, instead of using the Oriental type, he decided to use this Negrito as an example of Oriental people, which was really quite telling, as opposed to using somebody who might have been an Oriental actually.
In the 16th century, by missionaries, used to mean little black person. Until contact, the Andamanese were strict hunter-gatherers. They did not practice cultivation. Their only weapon was the bow and harpoon, and they knew of no method for making fire in the 19th century.
Again, a pre-Neolithic people. Not even bifacial blade technology and so on. Pretty much like black people were in West Sub-Saharan Africa before their contact in around 44 or 4500 BC, which led to Asillar Man and expanded cranial capacity. But we're over here about as far as we can get from them in the ancient world here. And let's look at this.
The Sentinelese were first contacted by the government in 1991. The contact party under the administration is always accompanied by security. The arrow-shooting Sentinelese are a constant fear.
This was back in the 1990s.
It is yet to be discovered what the residents of North Sentinel Island call themselves. They have been indexed as contacted Sentinelese. Gifts of coconuts are means to overcome limited communication and uncertain vocabulary. Coconuts do not grow on these islands, but they are valued by the Sentinelese.
They're hiding in the trees now, and they've seen them. They start showing them coconuts, and then they come over and put a good cachet of them out. Once the people come out, they give them more, and you can see them calling to them, actually using a different dialect from South India, and seeing if that'll actually effectively let them understand that they're saying coconut, come here, coconuts, come here. Hopefully you can see them showing up in the shadows. That's like the lead researcher guy there. He's trying to contact him, doing dances and stuff. And the dude dances inside the shadows there. Oh, they all get down behind the trees. He's saying coconut. Come here, coconuts. They'll probably develop a loan word from it.
Daga means coconut. Laha means come here. These words are familiar to the Jarawa tribe. We do not know if the Sentinelese understand it.
The death of a Christian missionary in 2019 that went to the Sentinel Islands to try to convert the natives had drawn world attention to the small island's reclusive inhabitants, who killed him as he was trying to convert the tribal population to Christianity.
I don't know if you ever saw the story on this, but it was a half Oriental person that had been caught up in Christianity, and he thought he could take these people and bring them to God. So he had paid somebody to bring him out to the island and just drop him off. And he was found full of arrows on the beach just a couple of days later. There's been limited contact with these people all along, In fact, some of the more famous times are whenever a ship ends up losing its engine and ran aground on there and barely made it out alive from these people. Others have not been so lucky with the idea. But this is also very much like what happened in West Sub-Saharan Africa, when apparently the Phoenicians, who were really the seafarers of ancient time, went around there and what they encountered. They even talk about it in one of their trade stories, where they went out the Pillars of Hercules and turned left and went on down, and they ended up finding a people that run as fast as horses and this, that, and the other, and then another people that they traded with by putting stuff on the beach and then going back out to the ship, and then they were supposed to leave them something for what they left them in this type of trade. Anyhow, let's continue here with people that are over near India that really aren't related to West Sub-Saharan Africans, although they do like to claim anybody that's darker than a sheet of paper, so you can surely tell that they're trying to do that. They seem to have this chip on their shoulder and everything has got to be either black or white, and they always try to discount the Caucasian spacemen somehow and interject themselves, but that's in other videos.
Since then, most governments, anthropologists, and religious organizations have decided to allow the Sentinel Island natives to be alone. There have been peaceful interactions, such as the one you're viewing now, from the 90s, but the tribe came out to meet them in the ocean and did not feel like their land, homes, or women and children were being threatened. The expedition also brought gifts of coconuts, rather than an intent to convert them to a new religious ideology, which is not suggested and no longer encouraged by most organizations.
Yeah, the idea of the spread of Christianity was pretty bad. Whenever they tried to do it through the Congo and areas there, a lot of those missionaries ended up getting eaten. Nobody's sure about how many, but somebody tabulated it up a long time ago. It's a gross number of people that went into Africa and never came back, trying to spread Christianity to these people. But they do worship the Caucasian God now. In fact, they'll actually claim that they were part of the Bible or things like that too. So this is just an analog, and you can see how this cargo cult thing could easily quickly get going on these idea of these ancestors, and they come from a land of coconuts and they leave us stuff. But then slowly after that, they come up with an idea that it's really from their ancestors somehow, and they stole this, so they have to give us some of it, and then they're expecting you to give them things. In fact, they feel entitled to it and say it's from their ancestors. We can definitely see that analog repeated.
The estimated 90 centenaries continue to live as hunters and gatherers, solely dependent on food provided by nature.
You can see he could barely carry that big old bag, and it's there. They say they roughly think there's 90 people there, so the gene pool is too small to even sustain itself over time. There's going to be cousins inbreeding no matter what you do. And so it's kind of ill-fated. But we've realized now, after doing this with like West Sub-Saharans and other people, that really we should leave this alone. And in a way, it allows us to still show that there are people like this. This is the way these people were, no matter all the jealous lies they try to give to you back at first contact. And if we look at contact before that point, which apparently involved admixing, they were still 4 foot tall, small-brained Homo erectus type that was there, like Iwo Iliru and before then. But these people had been interjected with Homo sapiens, so it's quite different, but ending up in a parallel outcome. Here we are looking over these people, and they're taking away their Christmas gifts.
The unbelief had a very mixed reaction first place, they cheerily greeted us on the shore and they indicated their presence by walking down towards the beaches and then disappeared. They are a very lively people who prefer to live in isolation, away from the mainstream of life.
The steppe population came in from the grasslands in Eastern Europe, corresponding to modern-day Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan.
Now this is just one depiction, and it doesn't actually show you, because this is looking at exclusively steppe ancestry, that other people that were attached to and around this, coming down and into what we would call Yemen or Saudi Arabia today, and in ancient Egypt. This green spot that's shown there is used quite a bit whenever they talked about all blue-eyed people appear to be related to these people that live right there in that green spot. What's that? Well, that's the Yamnaya culture. And it looks like they were one of the major players, but not the sole player, in what we used to call Aryans and now we call Proto-Indo-Europeans, and how they spread it through to the west and what we know of as Western Europe today, but also through Eastern Europe, all the way through China and around what we call China today, and down definitely into India. But if you look at that, they show you that it's a major swath across the top of it. And this is with different cultures like Darien Kuyu and so on, and the Harappan culture and things like that that went on. Let's continue.
The genetic research identifies that this steppe ancestry burst into India during a narrow time period dated between 2000 BC and 1500 BC. Once these steppe people entered India, they mixed with the Indus Valley people to create what is now called the ancestral North Indian grouping.
If you look at a lot of their statuaries, they show blue eyes in that. Not only that, but in the Mahabharata, there are multiple places where Indra and others are described as having blonde hair and so on. He'll tell you in a minute that horses weren't there along with cattle and so on before this point. That all this was brought to them in a together package type thing that led to what we call India today. But you can still see there's this caste system and a settling almost in a glass of certain people at the bottom of India that are very different than the people at the top of India, and the upper caste system in the top of India. But then there's a mix in between, kind of like that picture we showed you a minute ago with a lot of different rainbow colors, and so it how it developed the caste system.
However, a significant portion of the people of the Indus Valley civilization were pushed south when the steppe people entered. They then mixed with the ancient ancestral South Indians to form a group known as Ancestral South Indian Population. For the next 2,000 years, Indians mixed freely. As a result, most modern South Asians are a mix of ancestral North Indian and ancestral South Indian. However, around 1900 years ago, Indian society calcified into ethnic groups who do not intermarry across caste lines, a societal structure which for the most part is maintained until today. Perhaps the biggest learning from this genetic research is that it explains the various languages South Asians speak, how a single language family, the Indo-European family, stretches all the way from Britain to Bangladesh.
And here's his example. He shows, well, it's slightly overlaid with the other one, quite often with this fan that's here that shows, well, the top right hand corner going with Tocharian. All the way around Greeks and everybody else that was hooked up with these Proto-Indo-Europeans. In fact, all the Slavic and Baltic people, Germanic languages, English itself. But strangely, it also hooks up to Sanskrit directly. In fact, on another scale that they show, ancient Celtic and Irish are one of the closest dialects to Sanskrit.
and encompasses more than half of the modern world's population. It counts amongst its members ancient languages such as Sanskrit, Greek, and Latin, as well as modern tongues like English, Persian, and Hindi. The people who spread the Indo-European language family across Eurasia are the same steppe pastoralists who are key constituents in making up the modern Indian population. As the science paper states, its results provide evidence for the theory that these Indo-European or Aryan languages spread from the steppe. People believed to have brought Indo-European languages and Indo-European culture to Scandinavia were probably the battle axe culture, an offshoot of the Proto-Aryan Yamnaya culture of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, and this gave rise to the Nordic Bronze Age, which is considered the ancestral civilization of the Germanic peoples.
Recently I did a video about Egyptians, and it showed the earliest craniometry and things that people were doing whenever they correlated it and looked at 7,000 years of history there. They found a definite Nordic component that was there, hooked up also with blue-eyed people that started it off, kicked it off, got it going, the people that made the pyramids. And though after the intermediate periods in the Middle Kingdom area it kind of waned a little bit, right about the 18th dynasty, around Akhenaten, Ramses, King Tut, Seti, and so on, there was a resurgence there of this Nordic type of skull that they had found there. Pretty telling, actually.
A genetic study published in Nature in June 2015 examined the remains of a battle axe male buried in Viby, Sweden, 5,000 years ago. He was found to be a carrier of the paternal haplogroup R1A1A1, the haplogroup attributed to the ancient Aryans that disseminated agricultural civilization, advanced metals, horses, chariots, and Indo-European languages and religions to the rest of the ancient world.
Well, it's not just R1A1A1. In fact, it's not even just R. But they were the major contributor. There's R1B also, who is like Tsar Nicholas of Russia. But we've also found recently that was King Tut's. And if we could get some genetics out of the earliest ones that they were looking at before, I'm betting we're going to find that same haplogroup found in them. Sure, there's definitely a Mediterranean type that makes up the entire bulk of the Egyptian civilization. But if we want to look at who the Badarians and the Kata culture that ended up taking it over with Narmer and then bringing it into what we know of and revere as ancient Egypt, they actually refer to it by skull type as being a Nordic type. Of course, we find out through studies like this that Nordics weren't even always the Norse people, even in ancient times, and apparently they're hooked up to a lot of other people. In fact, the idea of a Nordic name being put on that is a bit of a false nomer. Well, we know who we're talking about, but yet there's still that issue.
I'm just finishing off a studio session because we're making a new documentary about the Aryan civilization, trying to find out whether they existed or not, where their homeland was, what kind of language they spoke. And I've been in Siberia and Kazakhstan. This was because we were trying to find, as I said, the root of the Aryan culture. There are some incredible new excavations there, Bronze Age excavations. What's particularly fascinating about them is that these cities are covered with swastika imagery. So rather than just looking at them as an archaeologist, you have to think, what is the political implication of these places?
Well, really, there shouldn't be any, except for the problems with World War II. These are symbols that have been around for thousands of years before that, not something that's attached to World War II. But it also was very revealing on how everything played out. And when you have a religion that tries to say that it was this one way, if you look at anybody else surrounding them and everywhere else involved, it wasn't even really like that, now was it? I love her work here. I've seen a lot of her videos where she goes to Crete and all these different locations and stuff. And I tried to do a video on this same thing. I hope this one goes through and doesn't get flagged. But I tried to do a video on the same thing that she said here, and I just wanted 4 or 5 statements, and it flagged it. And I tried to cut out the little pieces, and it flagged it. And I cut out another piece, and it flagged it. Now I felt like it was just a shadow of its former self. And I did another video, but I just talked my way through it with a couple of pictures as opposed to even showing this, because they won't allow you to show more than about 6 seconds at a time if they can catch it. Boom. And if they already caught it once before, they've got a microscope on you when you try to re-put it through. Let's continue though. What did she find here? Because this picture that's going to be shown is Arkham. A lot like the Batman thing and so on, but Arkham that we found here is an ancient spinning wheel of civilization and a general hub idea that was found that I did a video on a couple of years ago. She's going to talk about standing on top of big cities that are all buried, kind of like Göbekli Tepe.
And certainly a lot of people, a lot of very high up heads of state have gone to visit these digs to try to see if they should associate themselves with these swastikas, because this is probably where the Aryans, the original Aryans, lived and worshipped and founded what is probably the basis of Western and Eastern civilization. I was there with what is probably the basis of Western and Eastern civilization. Founded what is probably the basis of Western and Eastern civilization. I was there with the chief archaeologist, Professor